Out at sea, a fisherman named Jack came across an unusual sight, a solitary, abandoned building emerging from the ocean's surface. Its presence in such a remote location piqued his curiosity, prompting him to venture closer. The building, battered by time and weather, stood as a silent sentinel with a story yet to be told. Compelled by a mix of intrigue and caution, Jack decided to explore the building, unaware of the historical significance of what he was about to uncover. Jack hesitated when he started to steer his boat in the direction of the strange building that just seemed to appear out of the sea. It was already very late, and night was starting to fall. He was actually on his way back to shore at that moment, back to his hotel. And Jack knew that the wisest decision was to just stick to that course. But this building was just drawing him in somehow. Maybe this building was private property or something? The last thing Jack could use right now was to be arrested for trespassing. He already had trouble enough in the States. He did not need any more in France. He had wanted to go under the radar here as much as possible, posing as a simple fisherman on a one-man boat. Getting into the strange fort was a big risk he should not be taking, but he was already turning the wheel of the boat. His decision had been made when he first saw the building. He was going to explore it, whether it was a good idea or not. But getting into the building would prove more difficult than Jack had initially expected. When his little boat had made it to the side of the building, which was much larger up close than he had expected from a distance, Jack saw that the first row of window openings was actually quite high up. He could maybe climb the walls, but they were made really slippery by all the algae that had been growing on them for what could be decades. He also needed to find the best window opening to use. Most of them had bars in front of them, but Jack quickly spotted one that was busted up enough for him to probably be able to climb through. But how was he going to reach it? He would need to get a bit creative, and luckily it just so happened that breaking into buildings was one of Jack's specialties. What he had on the boat was a lot of fishing nets, and all those had a very strong rope keeping the edges together. And so he cut them from one of those nets and tied a large metal hook to the side of it. Then he started to just throw the hook in the direction of the window over and over again. It was anything but easy to aim on an ever-moving boat. But Jack was not going to give up. After about half an hour of trying, and Jack completely burning his arms out, he finally managed to hook something in the window, and the rope was secured. It was completely dark by now, as there were no lights illuminating the fort, and the shore was very far away still. Jack had to take a bit of a break to rest, and then started his climb into the darkness. When he finally made his way into the building, it was even darker than he had anticipated. He used the flashlight on his phone to check around the room, and he quickly noticed that every movement swept up a layer of dust. It was clear that nobody had been here in a long time, and the room was filled with a lot of interesting items. There were a lot of big things covered with old tarp. When Jack pulled it off, he saw a lot of old cannons. Suddenly, he started to better understand what this building was used for. It was most likely a fort of some sort used to defend the coastline from enemies. But these cannons were not the only strange thing Jack was going to find in this building. Jack wanted to go to the next room. His mind started to race with other things he could find here and potentially take. He had sworn that he was going to leave his thieving ways behind. But this was an opportunity that was simply too good to pass up. But the door leading out of this room was locked, and it did not look like he could just break it down easily. Jack started to go around the room. There had to be a way out of here. He started going past the walls and quickly noticed that not everything was as structurally sound as it was when it was built. Some bricks had gotten a bit loose, and with a few firm hits, they actually managed to break loose. This was Jack's way out of here. He started meticulously taking stones out of the walls until there was a hole in the wall big enough for Jack to crawl through. He knew that by doing this, he was potentially only causing more problems for himself. Up until now, He had only been trespassing, but now he was actually destroying property. Was this a risk worth taking for Jack? But there was no way back now anyway, and Jack had now managed to make the hole big enough for himself. He had already been shining his flashlight through it beforehand to see what was on the other side. The room was mostly empty by the looks of the things, but the door leading out of that room was actually open a bit. Jack squeezed his body through the hole and then quickly made his way to the door. His heart was pounding as if this door could give him access to the rest of the fort. He slowly opened the door to see if there was anybody or anything there waiting for him. But all he saw was the center of the fort, almost like a big arena. Jack's eyes widened as he took in the scene before him. The room was an improbable blend of history and modernity. Ancient military helmets lay scattered near sleek, unfamiliar gadgets that hummed softly in the gloom. This bizarre collection stirred in Jack a sense of wonder and confusion. How could such contrasting eras coexist in this forgotten space? The air was thick with the scent of salt and metal, hinting at tales of sea battles and forgotten technology. He moved carefully among the relics, each step raising a cloud of dust. The room felt like a time capsule, preserving moments from different epochs. Jack could almost hear the whispers of the past, echoing through the fort's walls as he touched a rusted cannon, imagining the battles it might have witnessed. His hands brushed against cold steel and brittle paper, traces of lives and stories long since passed into silence. The juxtaposition was baffling. Jack ran his fingers over the cold metal of the cannons, then turned to examine a sleek digital device that looked out of place among such antiquity. His mind raced, trying to piece together the story of this fortress, caught between eras, its purpose obscured by time. The clash of old and new created a dissonance, a mystery wrapped in an enigma, silently challenging him to solve it. Each artifact told a story, though the narrative was fragmented and enigmatic. Jack felt like a detective, deciphering clues from the past and present. The dust that covered everything seemed to hold secrets, a silent testament to the years of abandonment and the untold stories of this mysterious place. He pondered the hands that had crafted these objects, the battles they had seen, and the passage of time that had brought them here. As Jack delved deeper, the dimming light of the setting sun cast elongated shadows, transforming the mundane into the surreal. Shapes morphed and danced on the walls, blurring the lines between reality and illusion. And Jack felt himself slipping into a world that was both familiar and utterly alien. The room, bathed in twilight, seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the night to reveal its final secrets. As Jack ventured further, his flashlight beam fell upon an object that made his heart skip a beat. Tucked away in a shadowed corner lay something completely unexpected, its presence inexplicable in this ancient fortress. This startling discovery threw a new light on everything, turning the night into a series of unforeseen events. The air around him seemed to thicken with mystery, enveloping Jack in a cocoon of intrigue and uncertainty. Jack stood motionless, the weight of his find pressing heavily upon him. He understood the gravity of what lay before him and the potential consequences of his next actions. His mind wrestled with the decision to involve the authorities, a battle between his inherent curiosity and a sense of civic duty. The silence of the fort seemed to urge caution, yet the importance of his discovery demanded action. With a heavy heart, Jack conceded to his conscience. Despite his desire to keep exploring, he knew he couldn't ignore the implications of his find. Resigned, he reached for his phone, feeling the weight of responsibility. His decision to report his discovery was a reluctant one, driven more by a sense of obligation than a desire for involvement. It was a choice that could change the course of his quiet night. In the dim, eerie light, Jack dialed the number, his fingers unsteady. The sound of the ringing phone echoed through the vast, empty corridors of the fort, amplifying the sense of isolation. His voice, when he finally spoke, seemed to him both alien and distant, a stark contrast to the silence he had grown accustomed to. The fort's walls absorbed his words, leaving Jack feeling more alone than ever. Jack held the phone to his ear, his breath catching with each ring. The wait felt interminable, each second stretching out, filled with the weight of his discovery and its unknown implications. The darkness around him seemed to close in, as if the fort itself was holding its breath, waiting for the response that would seal its fate and Jack's involvement in the unfolding mystery. As the phone call ended, a tide of doubt washed over Jack. He replayed the conversation in his mind, each word amplifying his uncertainty. What would the authorities think of his trespassing? The gravity of his actions began to dawn on him, casting a shadow over his initial excitement. The fort, once a place of intrigue, now felt like a trap, closing in on him with every passing moment. The realization hit Jack like a cold wave. He could be arrested for this. Images of handcuffs and prison cells flooded his mind, fueling a growing sense of panic. His heart raced as he imagined the legal consequences, the thrill of discovery now replaced by a deep-seated fear. This wasn't just an adventure anymore. It was a potential path to incarceration. The need to flee became urgent and undeniable. Jack's decision was made in an instant. He couldn't risk capture. He rushed back through the fort's corridors, his footsteps echoing loudly in the empty halls. Every shadow seemed to leap at him, every noise a potential pursuer. He reached his boat with a sense of desperation, casting off hurriedly. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, all focused on escape, on evading the grasp of the law. As Jack's boat cut through the water, the lights of the fort receded into the darkness behind him. Mixed feelings churned within him, relief at his escape, unease about what he had left behind. The night was quiet, but Jack's mind was not. He questioned his decisions, his motives, and the consequences that might follow. The sea ahead was dark and unknown, mirroring the uncertainty of his future. The sea around Jack seemed to mirror his inner turmoil. Waves of regret and apprehension crashed against the boat, each one a reminder of the choices he had made. The rhythm of the water was like a heartbeat, pulsing with the tension of his predicament. In the vast darkness, with only the stars as his companions, Jack faced a future as unpredictable and treacherous as the sea itself. Jack steered his boat with utmost care, zigzagging through the waves to obscure his trail. He constantly glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see the police in pursuit. Each maneuver was a calculated effort to distance himself from the fort, to erase any hint of his presence there. The water around him rippled with his anxiety, reflecting his desperate need to remain unseen, to become just another shadow in the night. As he navigated away, the image of his discovery lingered in Jack's mind, haunting him like a specter. The memory was vivid, refusing to be dimmed by the darkness of the night. It echoed through his thoughts, a constant reminder of what he had stumbled upon. The sea's monotonous lapping against the boat's hull seemed to rhythmically reinforce the haunting echoes of his unprecedented find. The solitude of the sea became Jack's only companion, a vast emptiness in which he wrestled with his conscience. The isolation magnified his inner turmoil, turning the boat into a solitary confessional. He grappled with the potential consequences of his actions, the weight of what might lie ahead. The endless expanse of water around him mirrored his feeling of being adrift in a sea of uncertainty and regret. As night deepened, sleep became an elusive stranger to Jack. His mind was a tumultuous sea, waves of doubt and fear crashing against the shores of his consciousness. He lay awake, the boat gently rocking as he wrestled with the implications of his discovery. The darkness seemed to amplify his unrest, each shadow a reminder of the uncertainty that now dominated his thoughts and clouded his future. Jack gazed up at the night sky, seeking solace in its vastness, but found none. The stars, usually a source of wonder, now seemed indifferent to his plight. They offered no guidance, no answers to the torrent of questions swirling in his mind. In the silent conversation with the cosmos, all he found was a reflection of his own troubled thoughts, scattered like the stars above. Back on shore, the French police, intrigued by the cryptic nature of Jack's call, sprang into action. Officers coordinated a meticulous search operation, piecing together the scant details provided. Maps were spread out, and search areas marked, as they prepared to scour the coastline and the surrounding waters. The urgency was palpable among the team. They knew that every minute counted in the race to uncover the truth behind Jack's mysterious discovery. Police boats sliced through the dark waters, their powerful beams cutting through the night. Teams of officers scanned the sea, eyes trained for any sign of Jack's boat. The water's surface glittered under the glare of the searchlights, turning the sea into a vast canvas of light and shadow. Radio chatter filled the air as the boats communicated, coordinating their efforts in a relentless pursuit across the undulating waves. Above, helicopters throbbed through the night sky, their rotors beating a steady rhythm. Equipped with advanced surveillance technology, they scoured the ocean, their cameras peering into the darkness. The pilots and observers worked in unison, their eyes glued to the screens, searching for any trace of Jack's boat amidst the vast expanse of sea. The helicopter's spotlight swept across the water, adding an aerial edge to the intensive search. As the search continued, the police began piecing together Jack's last known location. Calls were made, data analyzed, and routes traced. The intensity of the search grew as they narrowed their focus, converging on the area where Jack was last seen. The atmosphere among the search teams was tense, each member aware that they were closing in on the elusive boat, their determination sharpening with every passing moment. The police efforts intensified as time ticked away. It was a race against the clock, with each minute heightening the urgency of their mission. Officers worked tirelessly, their resolve undimmed despite the passing hours. The sea, vast and unforgiving, seemed to mock their efforts, but they pressed on, driven by a growing desperation to find Jack before he vanished into the vastness of the open water. After days of evasive sailing, Jack's luck finally ran out. The police, through relentless pursuit and keen investigative work, cornered him on the open sea. Their approach was methodical and inescapable, leaving Jack with no options. The sight of the police boats converging on him was sobering, signifying the end of his flight. The inevitability of his capture settled over him like a cold, damp fog, leaving a bitter taste of defeat. Surrounded by a sea of flashing police lights, Jack knew resistance was futile. With a heavy heart, he cut the engine of his boat and raised his hands in surrender. As the officers boarded his vessel, the reality of his situation became overwhelming. The flashing lights reflected off the water, creating a surreal scene as Jack, resigned to his fate, was taken into custody in the silent open sea. Once in custody, the police formally accused Jack of trespassing and causing property damage. These accusations stung, frustrating him deeply. He tried to explain the innocence of his intentions, but the words seemed hollow even to his ears. The reality of the legal implications of his adventure began to loom large, overshadowing the thrill and curiosity that had initially driven him to the fort. Handcuffed and escorted away, Jack's head hung low, his heart heavy with regret. His adventure, which had begun with a sense of wonder and excitement, was ending in disgrace. As he walked past the curious onlookers, the weight of his actions truly hit him. His curiosity had led him to a path he hadn't foreseen, one that ended not in glory, but in stark, cold reality. As Jack was processed at the police station, the full impact of his actions began to dawn on him. The sterile environment of the station, the paperwork, and the formal procedures stripped away the last remnants of his adventure. Each step in the process felt like a heavy blow, solidifying his transition from a free-spirited explorer to a detainee, caught in the rigid grasp of the law. In the interrogation room, the air was thick with tension as Jack faced his interrogators. Their scrutinizing gazes bore into him, each glance a silent accusation. The room felt claustrophobic, the walls echoing back every word. Jack sat rigid, his hands clasped tightly, as he prepared to defend his actions. The investigators' expressions were unreadable, their demeanor professional yet distant, setting the stage for a confrontation where every word would count. The questioning began, each query laced with skepticism. The police officers probed Jack's motives, their doubts hanging heavily in the room. Every answer Jack provided was met with further questions, as if his words were pieces of a puzzle they were trying to solve. The intensity of their scrutiny was relentless, and Jack could feel the weight of their disbelief, adding pressure to his already burdened conscience. Jack, sensing the growing skepticism, attempted to explain the accidental nature of his discovery. He spoke earnestly, his voice tinged with desperation, as he tried to convey the innocence of his curiosity. His plea for understanding was heartfelt, an appeal to the officer's sense of reason. He hoped for leniency, for a chance to be heard and believed amidst the growing tide of doubt and accusation. As Jack recounted his story, the reality of his predicament became increasingly clear. With each detail he revealed, he could sense the gravity of his situation. The officers' reactions ranged from incredulous to concerned, their faces a mirror to the seriousness of the allegations against him. Jack's narrative, while truthful, seemed to weave a web that tightened around him, the consequences of his actions looming ever larger. Jack found himself in an uphill battle to prove his innocence. The evidence against him was mounting, each piece painting a picture that seemed to incriminate him further. He struggled to articulate his side of the story, to break through the wall of skepticism that the police had built. Every word he spoke felt inadequate against the backdrop of the evidence, his attempts to convey his innocence seemingly lost in translation. In the stark reality of the police station, Jack was confronted with the formal charges against him. The legal terms, trespassing, property damage, echoed in his mind, each word a stark reminder of the severity of his situation. As the ramifications of his actions were laid out before him, Jack felt a deep sense of dread. The adventure that had started with curiosity was now entangled in the cold, hard threads of the law. As Jack listened to the legal complexities, his frustration grew. The situation was more intricate than he had ever imagined, each legal point adding to a web of complications. He felt trapped, caught in a maze of legalities that he barely understood. The more he heard, the more entangled he felt, his initial sense of adventure now replaced by a gnawing realization of the trouble he was in. Alone in his cell, the reality of his situation sunk in. The four walls around him were a stark contrast to the open sea and the freedom he had enjoyed. Jack replayed the events in his mind, tracing the path that had led him here. Each choice, each decision, now seemed like a step in an inevitable journey to this moment. The solitude amplified his thoughts, turning them into a loud echo of regret and introspection. Sitting on the hard cot, Jack grappled with a mix of regret and resolve. He regretted the decisions that brought him here, but was resolved to learn from this experience. The uncertainty of what lay ahead was daunting, yet he knew he had to face it with a clear mind and a lesson learned. This ordeal, he decided, would not define him, but would instead be a catalyst for change and growth. As the days passed, Jack braced himself for the legal process to unfold. Each passing moment was a step closer to learning his fate. The wait was agonizing, filled with a mix of hope and fear. He tried to prepare himself for any outcome, his mind constantly racing through possible scenarios. The unknown future loomed over him, a constant presence in the small, confined space of his cell. During the interrogation, an officer casually mentioned the name Fort Boyard, a phrase that sparked Jack's curiosity. He learned that the fort was not only a historical monument, but also a site for entertainment shows. This revelation was unexpected, illuminating the fort in a completely different light. The knowledge that he had trespassed into a place of both historical and cultural significance added a new layer to his already complicated situation. As Jack absorbed this information, the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. The mix of ancient artifacts and modern equipment he had stumbled upon suddenly made sense. The fort's dual nature as a historical site and a modern entertainment venue clarified the incongruities he had observed. This understanding, while enlightening, also compounded his sense of bewilderment about the entire ordeal. The realization that Fort Boyard was a setting for television shows added a surreal twist to Jack's adventure. He recalled the strange and seemingly out-of-place items he had discovered, now understanding they were likely props and set pieces. This blending of reality and fiction in his experience was disorienting, making his adventure feel like part of a scripted narrative rather than a spontaneous exploration. Jack grappled with the idea that his discovery, which he had thought significant and mysterious, was part of a larger entertainment spectacle. The fort, a stage for television dramas and adventures, had unwittingly included him in its latest episode. The irony of his situation wasn't lost on him. His genuine exploration had inadvertently become a footnote in the fort's ongoing story as an entertainment venue. As Jack reflected on the absurdity of his situation, a bitter sense of humor crept in. The reality was stranger and more convoluted than any fiction he could have imagined. The fact that his genuine curiosity had led him into a world of staged adventures and fictional setups was almost laughable. In the end, his real-life escapade had intersected with the imaginary world of television in the most unexpected way. One of the officers, seeing Jack's confusion, explained further about his find in Fort Boyard. The room where Jack had felt an eerie presence housed sleeping tigers, used as dramatic props for a television show. This detail stunned Jack. Realizing he had been mere steps away from these majestic but potentially dangerous animals, the knowledge that he had unknowingly shared a space with tigers added an intense, almost unbelievable twist to his story. The revelation about the tigers shed new light on the danger Jack had unknowingly faced. His earlier feelings of unease in the fort now seemed justified. The threat had been real, even if unseen. The thought of what could have happened had he disturbed the animals sent a shiver down his spine. This new information painted his previous actions in a more perilous light, adding a serious tone to his otherwise adventurous tale. As Jack learned more about Fort Boyard's role in entertainment, he began to understand the breadth of its use as a television set. The presence of the tigers was a startling example of the lengths to which the show's producers went to create drama and intrigue. This behind-the-scenes glimpse into the world of television production was fascinating, yet it also underscored the risks and unpredictability of such an environment. The knowledge of the tigers made Jack reevaluate the risks he had taken. His adventure, while thrilling, had unknowingly skirted danger. He pondered the fine line between curiosity and recklessness, realizing that his quest for discovery had almost led him into a potentially life-threatening situation. This reflection brought a sobering perspective to his journey, making him more aware of the unforeseen hazards that can lurk in the pursuit of adventure. Despite the legal ramifications he now faced, Jack couldn't help but acknowledge the uniqueness of his experience at Fort Boyard. His story, filled with mystery, discovery, and unexpected twists, was something extraordinary. The blend of historical exploration and inadvertent involvement in a modern-day television production was a tale few could claim. Jack's adventure, though fraught with challenges, had indeed become a remarkable narrative in its own right.